Right, first up I want to talk about is my rig. So without doubt, probably the most important thing after feeding that we've got to get right in the edge. And there's a few little key points that I want to focus on just to make sure that they're right for whatever situation is. Like, as I said, today we're talking about really shallow margins. The deepest I've got is probably, I'm going to say 22 inch, maybe a little bit more, maybe 24 inches. That's the deepest I'm going to go. So it's nice, I mean, something small that I can keep a track of what's going on. That's what we're going to focus on today. So I've got two rigs set up for today, but I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But firstly, the thing I'm going to choose is the correct float. I mean, I only use 2 floats for my margin fishing when it's that shallow water that I'm talking about. That'll either be something nice and positive, which in that case is a 0.4, which is really important. I'll talk about it in a minute. Something nice and heavy. There's some that Richie Wilson makes for me. Them really, and they've got 2 but they're really stable. They're just bulletproof. I mean, I can really kick their asses, and they're going to take whatever it takes them without letting me down throughout the day. They're my carp fishing float that I'll use when I'm catching proper fish with big baits, which hopefully is going to be in today's case. Secondly, if I want to swap and it's more small fish, small carp, small F1s, then I want to swap something a little bit lighter, mainly in the bristle. I find that these, a 2mm bristle could be a little bit too pokey. When it's finicky F1s and they're being a bit funny, then dropping down to a smaller bristle size, which I think they're a Malman Goldie, they're a 1.5mm hollow bristle. And you can just read them a little bit more sensitive when I need it, but if I were to use them for carp, they'd be completely wrong. So first thing, picking the right float. So that's really, really important, choosing one or the other that's going to do the job, not let me down and not make me miss bites, not make me foul up fish, things like that. The float definitely helps. Secondly, it's a shotting. So down the edge, I don't see any reason whatsoever, again, that shallow water that I keep talking about, anything less than 20 inch, in having any other shotting than a proper solid bulk. That there's no reason for it. Because as soon as you get a volume of fish into that reduced volume of water, because we're going to have 20 inches sort of cubed all around the peg that we're fishing in. If we get 4 or 5 5-pounders, and that's like a washing machine, it's all over the place with the water displacement. So if I have a strung out light airy-fairy rig, it's not going to stay where I want it to do, right over my bait where I want it to. So instead, by having a solid bulk straight on top of my hook length, it's just going to keep it in place. That is the key thing that we're going to talk about later in another tip, is keeping it right over my feed in the right place. If I can't do that, if my rig's not helping me to do that, there's no point using any other rig. I'm just going to end up foul looking fish, missing bites, and getting less bites because I'm not being accurate all the time. So a nice solid bulk, so on top of a 3 or 4 inch hook length. It's neither's right, neither's wrong if I'm honest. Say 3 inch gets you a bit closer for F1s. I like a 4 inch for carp, if I'm honest. So I've got a 4 inch hook length, great big bulk of number 8 right on top of that keeps it in place. Couple of fine tuners under my float. Other than that, pretty much job done. So I've got one rig there that I've set for, what are you going to give me there? I'm going to go for 14 inch, 15 inch, 16 inch. So I say 15, 16 inch, that's my shallowest rig. And I've got a second float for a little bit deeper for another tip that we're going to talk about in a minute. For a little bit, when I go a bit further, another 6 or 8 inches deeper. And you'll notice that my other float has got a much longer stem. So exactly the same float, but say Richie just does these longer floats, I forget the name of these ones. With a slightly longer stem that just makes it a bit more stable when that water gets a little bit deeper. So other than that, all the components are exactly the same. Line and that wise, I'm a big fan of being nice and robust with mainline these days. So I'm fishing 0.19 on both of them as my mainline, or 0.18.5 I think it is. And hook length, it depends what you're catching. Yeah, it depends on how snaggy it is, what you've got to fish it next to. So in today's case, I've got a nice 0.14. That's going to be plenty enough for doing what I want to do, for catching 4 to 5 pound fish. And lastly, it's matching it to the right elastic. Yeah? In this case, I've gone with our yellow slick, which I'm still getting used to all the slicks. I must admit, I'm not completely, this is the right one. But at the moment, I'm loving the yellow one. It's really nice for me. Me positive margin fishing, when I need to catch 10 fish in the last 15 or 20 minutes, when they rock up, this is doing the job for me. It's not too strong that I feel like I'm going to snap my pole, and also not too strong that it's overpowering my 0.14, which is really, really important for me. It's about matching your elastics to your hook length. So it's just right that it does the job, gets the fish out nice and quick without any messing about, which is say that's the key point for me. But with that done, so there's my 2 rigs nice and covered. What I'm going to do now is whiz around to the other side, and I'm just going to show you the 2 areas that have the side of the plumb and the reason why I've chosen to do so. Right, so next step I'm going to plumb up just to go through the 2 different steps that I find just to get the right place to fish. So firstly, what I will say, I have done a bit of a sneaky one that I'm pleasure fishing today, so I can do what I want, but in a match, if you're allowed, it's well worth just going down the edges at the start before the match, just having a little poke with a tocket or landing net. So it just saves so much time, just giving you a little heads up on like how deep it is. And also it's really important to just have a little stab on the bottom, just see what you're fishing against. It can tell you so much, just a quick poke with the end of your landing net with the pointy end, not with your net obviously. And just have a look what's going on the bottom. It definitely saves you quite a bit of time. So down there, say I've done so already. And what I've found is I've got a little bit of an undercut. So I can get a poke and I can definitely feel a bit of water beneath the bank. And then I've got a nice hard bottom. I'm on gravel or stones or bricks or whatever. You know what I mean? It's a nice hard bottom. So I've not got to worry about my bait getting lost in any reed and any rubbish that's settled on the bottom. So already I know I'm fishing on the right sort of bottom that's going to make my bait stand out. It's not going to disappear in any rubbish. So first step, I whiz my plummet onto my little rig. So my little rig's always I'd say my favourite rig sort of thing. It's where I want to catch. I mean, if I can catch in there tight into the edge, that's going to be far more efficient. Eliminate liners, things like that. I'll talk about a bit more in a later tip. It's going to be my best line by far. So that's always my first step. And I want to find a nice tight depth, really close to the bank. So I'm plumbing up there. What I'm plumbing to is middle of my body and my float, just so I've got a little bit of slack so my bait's not really tight. Literally as tight as I can get. I mean, I physically can't get any tighter. I'm touching the bank there, I can't get anywhere else. And it's important that I can do that as long as I've got enough depth to fish in. Like in that case, I'm getting 15 inch. So it's well worth fishing in that depth because the fish are going to be happy going into it. If that was less, if it was sort of 8 inches or less, I suppose, then I'd be a bit dubious as to whether you want to go up there. Littler fish might, but big carp can be really moody and not quite want to go into that shallow water, which is why we've got the second rig covered, just in case for whatever reason they want to hang down a little bit. So that's a real key point that I've learned in me margin fishing over the last couple of years. It's probably come from fishing for F1s a lot. I'm very similar to fishing the far bank of a snake lake. I suppose that's where the thought process has come from. In that the difference in having a rig that may only be 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 inches deeper, the difference it makes is phenomenal. It's how different those two lines can behave, how many fish can be present on one and not the other. It is absolutely unreal. So I know I've got my rig tight to the bank there, right in line with the same place. What I want to do is just come off the bank, say 2 foot. I'm going to find 6 inches, 10 inches, whatever I feel like deeper out there. So I've got that depth. So I'm going to say 2 foot out from the bank. I've got a deeper line to fish. If that's where the fish want to be, which is a very good chance early in the session, there's going to be some fish on that deeper line instead of coming tight to the bank. It also gives me an area I can often go to and catch a few early fish just before they really do rock up into the bank. So it just gives me a few fish before, say, the main arrival occurs. So it's going to be 2 options in depth, just as I would do if I was fishing on the far bank of a slate lake. And I can judge what's happening on the day. So it's a big area where people go wrong when it comes to edge fishing, and that they just fish one line down the edge. So you almost, I can't remember having the really good productive days down the edge and just fishing one line. It's always a case of moving about to find a happy spot of where the fish want to be on the day, whether it's the right depth or it could just be something on the bottom, a nicer area where your bait's sitting, your bait's standing out better, and finding those areas by having a couple of multiple, not lines, but a couple of rigs to mess about down the edge. It can definitely benefit you and put a lot more fish in your net just to find an area where you get clean bites and the fish homing on your bait a bit quicker than other areas. So other than that, that's pretty much it. So my 2 rigs are pretty much covered. Nice and simple today, we're just on the top 4. So I've got 1 tight to the bank, 1 2 foot away in an extra, what am I going to say there, an extra 8 inch of water. I'd say I'm going to have a little play next. Next we're going to go through, before I do any feeding, we're going to go through some bait. I want to talk about what bait I'm going to use, how I mix my bait more importantly, just to get it to perform right when I put it down there. Right, next up, so I want to talk about my bait. It's very popular to pretty much everyone else in the country. I'm a big fan of feeding ground bait down the edge. It's mega popular, gets loads of fish in, does the job. But I think these days the amount of bait and the way people are feeding it has definitely got a bit out of hand, and it's definitely wrong. Like really, really wrong if I'm honest. People are feeding it in a completely wrong way and they're messing the pegs up big time down the edge. In fact, I want to touch on that in a bit. Let me leave that for a minute. So what I'll talk about today, the 2 types of bait I like to use is my ground bait that I've got ready mixed. So I've mixed my ground bait really wet, borderline messed it up. I mean, I've just thrown a load of great big lumps because I put so much water in it. I want it not spoiled, but it's a struggle to get through the riddle. I mean, I've really got to push it through the riddle. It's not clagged up, but it's really heavy, because the last thing I want is any of my ground bait to be coming off the bottom. So by mixing the ground bait, pretty much whatever you choose. I'm a big fan of the krilly fish meal type mixers, just because they're dead potent and they're full of pellets. I mean, it's really attractive. And what they also allow you to do is to mix them, say, add loads of water to them. If you ever have, say, poor quality ground baits, have too much bread and too many bulking agents in, they're the ones that go clagging and they're very difficult to over-wet. It's great for fluffy ground baits, but when you want to over-wet them, they can be a little bit tricky to do. So say I've mixed that really wet, borderline. You know what I mean? I can make paste out of that if I give that a proper squeeze. It's soaking. But what I know is that's going to stay on the bottom, keep where I want it to do, and not waft about too quick. Secondly, and definitely my go-to in preference to ground bait on most occasions, is my micro pellets. So again, I've softened my micro pellets up ready to make them as heavy as they possibly can. And with micro pellets, hey, it depends what's going on in my peg and what species I want, and also the slope of my bank, which I'm going to talk about later. Is how many micro pellets I feed depends on what's going on. It's definitely the feed agent in my ground bait. If I mix the two together, that's the thing that keeps the fish there and stays in place a little bit longer than the ground bait. So they can be really important when I've got, if the fish are being a bit moody, if they're wafting all over the place and the hards are pinned down, that it's tricky to get them on that spot, then micro pellets stay in place longer, so they give me a longer time to get a bite. In turn, that they can cause problems, or they can waft about a little bit too much, and they stay as pellets all over my peg, so they can cause problems in that way. So again, I'm going to talk about the two, but micro pellets are my second bait. For getting the fish down the edge and getting them over the top of my bait, that's my preferred thing. And the way I've wetted them is a little bit different, in that I've completely covered them in water and let them soak. So now I've got nice wet spongy pellets, which are lovely, or they would be lovely if I were to feed them, say, loose on a method feed or whatever. But down the edge, what I want with my micro pellets is that to actually spoil them, so I wet them twice. Yeah, I've wet them once, so they've gone nice and soft, and they're not wet, but they're all soft and you can squeeze them. What I want to do now is wreck them. Yeah, so by putting a great big lump of water on them, what I want to create is stodgy pellets. Yeah, still pellets that stay as individual pellets, don't break down to mush. So that'll do, because I've wet them twice, they will do that. But in turn, I get nice little lumps out of them instead. So when they sink, they don't sink in, so it's like a mushroom cloud. If you put in a dry-ish pellet, a soft dry pellet, then when they sink, they like mushroom out your cup, which is the last thing I want, because I don't want them to spread all over my peg. By really stodging my pellets up, they sink in a lump. So it makes that footprint on the bottom a lot tighter, keeps things really tight. Now all I'm going to do is, when I actually start fishing, is decide which is best on the day, whether I want my stodgy micros, just ground bait, or whether I want a combination of them both. Just seeing what the fish wants on the day, whether the fish are coming in, which I'm going to talk about more again when we're fishing, whether I need that bait to waft away, whether I'm getting a nice clean bite and I can get away with just micros. I'm going to mess about with the two and see which is best. So every single day is different, and hopefully we'll be able to explain it a bit more when we're fishing. So my two lots of feed out the way, next up hook bait. And if I'm honest, it's completely up to you when it comes to hook bait. If there's a mixture of species you want to catch, if there's some barbel, if there's some littler fish, then you're best off erring on the maggots and the expander pellet option, because it's a little bit more versatile, you're going to get more bites. For me, whenever I'm carp fishing, I use corn exclusively, that's it, because I probably have confidence more than anything, but it's the weight. A weight of a great big heavy piece of corn, maybe a piece of meat on a very odd occasion, stays in place. When I put my little pile in, I can get that corn to go right on top of it and stay there. That's all I'm after when it's down the edge. I want something heavy that stays in place, that's not going to get wafted about by the fish. So for me, Jolly Green, the number one all the time. Stick a big lump of that on, it's going to stay right in place where I want it to be. So other than that, they're nice and simple. So you can mess about as much as you want when it comes to hook baits. It's the feeding that's the important thing, and making sure that everything stays where you want it to be. Right, next thing I want to talk about, and this is the good stuff, if I'm honest. It's timing and how your bait behaves on the bottom. They're some of the key points when it comes to fishing down the edge. And say timing, the first one I want to cover on. I'm definitely not a believer for a second that it's the big volumes of bait that get fish into your peg. Yeah, I definitely believe when it comes to edge fishing, if you're in a similar situation to everyone else, if it's within a match, in today's case, for example, we were every other peg, and I was in the middle of a group of anglers, I've got no belief for a second that those fish come into my peg because of the load of bait there. Yeah, fish come in when they want to come in. Yeah, it doesn't matter when you put 20 pots down there or whether you haven't fed it at all. They come in having a little look when it's time to feed. It's where they come to have a mooch. The exception being is if you draw a special peg, which I'm a bit familiar with that sort of stuff, but if you draw an end peg with the wind blowing in, then that can be a little bit different. They can be there a lot earlier. But my general rule for down the edge is I do not feed anything down the edge until someone else catches a fish within my vicinity, as long as I feel that an angler's in the same sort of position as me. I mean, that peg's similar to mine, and he's catching a couple down the edge. Yeah, it's time. They're definitely coming in to have a feed, and you'll start seeing a few signs. It's time to get a bit of bait down there. Definitely minimum amounts of bait. Minimum amounts of bait as well. Really, really important, which I want to demonstrate next. Because my theory is that if I go down the edge and feed with big angry pot, I mean, that's a sensible amount that I see a lot of people feeding. Just one, I think they're 250, the smaller pots we've got. One 250ml pot. If you can imagine putting that in, by the time that goes in the bottom, do you know what I mean? I've done it on my nice towel, that spread to that sort of size. Yeah, and then I've got my little piffling hook bait somewhere in the middle of it. Yeah, the chances of me getting a bite off putting a great big pot in immediately, they're really, really slim. Do you know what I mean? I need a lot of fish to be in that peg to actually get a bite. Do you know what I mean? And I'm going to get problems because the fish have got all this massive area, and this is a small scale. It'll spread a lot more when it's put in the water, and if you've got a few fish messing about as well. But if you can imagine that the chances of that bait getting picked out, it's so slim. I'm going to get liners, I'm going to get messed about. My bait's going to get wafted about more and more and more because it's spread in the first place. It's just going to be a mess. I mean, it's going to look really good. I'm going to have tails all over the place, and the more I put in, the more fish come in, and the better it looks. But that means nothing. You don't win any prizes for having the most carp in your margin. You have no win for having them in your net, which is the most important thing, to get them in your net, to get that bite. So this sort of feeding, that multiple pots, big pots after every fish, unless you're in a very, not unique, but you have to have the right sort of peg to do so. You have to have a peg with a really steep incline that allows you to put bait in. A fish comes in, you catch it, and then it washes away, then you're just going to mess your peg up. If you try and achieve that on a flat bottom peg, which we're not far off today, it's a very, very slow gradient today, I'm just going to have a mess. My peg's going to be all over the place, bait all over the place, and very little chance of me getting a bite. And the way that fish feed as well, that's just worth touching on quick, is that I definitely don't believe carp come into your peg and suck. They don't just trough. They come in your peg, and often early in the session as well, when they're a bit moody, they have 1 or 2 mouthfuls and then they go. And you'll see them, they'll come into your peg, little feed, and then go. And then 20 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, a minute later, who knows, they do a circle, they come back. Because they're never happy to put their heads down and compete, get confidence. So them just passing in my peg, the chance of them picking up my bait up while they're doing so, it's never going to happen. I mean, I'm really, really struggling to give myself the best chance of getting a bite. So instead, you are far, far better when it comes to your margins, picking it in the right time. So because I know that they're coming in, because I've seen Bob or Fred or Albert or whoever get the bite before me, it gives me a chance. And by feeding just a small cup instead, so one of my special cups that we'll talk about later, I can instead create that on the bottom. Yeah, by creating a nice tight pile and put my bait over the top of it, which one's going to get a bite first? It's a no-brainer. So if the fish are coming into the margins, I'm going to get a bite every single time. Whether it's in my peg for one suck, one mouthful, or what, I'm never going to have to disperse the bait. My bait's not going to go all over the place. The carp's just going to come in and go and nail a lot, well, the vast majority, obviously. And I'm going to get a bite every single time, or I'm going to give myself the best chance of getting a bite at the same time. And what it does, it's so much better for managing my peg. It allows me to keep in touch with what's going on the bottom and what overspill there is, something I've talked about a lot in the past, in that I don't want there to be a great big build-up of bait, because eventually I'll achieve this if I do, and say I'll make it worse and worse. What I want to do is try and dictate the right size pot to use all the time, the right pile to put in, to allow me to go in, get a bite, and there to be very, very little left. I mean, just a few stragglers left that can just disperse all over the place and not create any big areas of feed for the fish to home in on. Instead, my initial pile every time I feed is going to be the main attraction area that they home in on, and hopefully gets me a bite nice and quick every time. Right, so with everything sorted, I get to have a little fish now. So what I'm going to start off, I say it's talking, whether it's right or not for today, I don't know. It's probably going to get a bit messy if I'm honest, because there's a lot of fish in here. But I'm going to talk about why I swap them out my rigs, why I have the two options. So at first, what I will admit to is about 10 minutes ago, I snuck one tiny little ball, just that sort of amount, yeah, on my deepest line, just to get a few fish there. I don't want there to be a lull, if you like, between me fishing out there and coming down the edge and waiting for them to come into my peg. So by giving them a little sneaky pile, hopefully it's enough to get a few fish into my peg, but at the same time not to spread bait all over the place. So I'm going to start off, hopefully that little pile now, I'm hoping it's gone. I mean, I've not seen any fish there because I'm putting it on that deeper line where I'm getting, yeah, 24 inch maybe a bit more. So I'm not really going to see anything very quickly on that line. But by starting there, I give myself a better chance at getting a bite than if I were to start right in the shallow water, only because I'm not seeing any. Because if I was seeing any, I'd be straight on the shallowest bit. I'm going to put my little pile in, so you can see them stodgy micros, they go in beautifully. They go in a nice lump all the way to the bottom. And then I'm just going to put that rig right over the top of it, so I can see my little fizzing going on, so I know exactly where I am. I'm going to see what's going on. So the beauty about these rigs is, very similar to me winter sort of pellet type rigs, something's going on there, is that they tell you when there's fish in your bag. Because it's such a heavy amount of shot just above your hook length, it lets you know that something's going on. So you can see very quickly there, there's something in on that pile. Yeah, they're not messing about, they're straight in on that pile and they're nailing it. But you can see I've had issues there, I haven't had a nice clean bite, which tells me that they've come in quite quickly. Maybe there's some roach come in as well, but also that more than likely I'm in too much water to begin with. I mean, straight away these fish want to be shallower. Do you know what I mean? I can see that on my float. I'm not getting clean bites, it's dancing all over the place. I've actually just seen a couple of swirls just past my hook bait, a swirl to the left then. So there's carp in my peg. These are definitely carp that have come straight in on the micros, but because they're going in a bit more water than I'd like and they're dispersing a bit more than I'd want, it's a bit too messy. So you can see this rig at the present time, utter waste of time. But if the fish weren't in my peg so quick, if it was just an odd fish coming in, I'd have definitely give myself the best chance at getting a bite quicker. Yeah, what this rig can also work as lovely is that when you move to your shallow line and you start catching a few and you have a run of fish, sometimes it can go quiet at random points in the day, often by dropping, oh, there's some roach in my bag as well, often by dropping back down to my deeper line, I can have another little run, I can catch another 2 or 3 fish. It's a little roach. I catch another 2 or 3 fish in the periods when they're not coming in, so it just puts half a dozen fish in my net that I wouldn't have put in my net if I were to just be stubborn or lazy or whatever you want to call it, and just have the one rig in the shallower water. So I'm going to give that one more go, because I'm happy that there was some carp coming into that. And then put me lump into my pot. So it's hard today because we've got sort of no one to go by. You know what I mean? We're officially pleasure fishing today, and we've not even had a little sneaky go or anything. So it's hard to know whether they're coming in en masse or how they're feeding. There's no one to watch today. All I've got to do is suck it and see, if you like, go on it and see what mood they're in. The same again, put my little pile in, I can see exactly where that is with the fizz in. So I'm holding that float as tight over my pile as you can. Same again, problems. Yeah, liner, bit messy, it just means I'm in the wrong depth. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give it this one more cast, and then straight away I'm going to move to the best area. So in this case, definitely this rig has been, say, not worthwhile, but say we're in quite an extreme situation here. We're at a lake that is absolutely solid. So we've got a lot of fish coming in, and they just want to be in shallower water at this time, because it's only us doing it. They're coming in quite quick, eating all the bait and causing a bit of a mess in that depth. So I'm going to give it another 10 seconds, see if I get an indication or see if something happens. And if not, I think I've just seen a carp then. Bit of a swirl towards me. That's calming down a little bit now. Maybe the initial chaos has calmed down a little, and oh no, see, it's all swirling up again now. So I'm going to get a line or a foul hook one any second. A proper bite. Same again, wrong fish. That'll just be wrong depth. That was a big roach. That Pollard, I love that one. So instantly I'm going to swap to me other peg. And hopefully what I'm going to find is that you often find with silvers when they're in your peg, if you can find a shallowish depth, there'll be a point where they don't want to come in any shallower. And say when they do that, it's sort of because they get eaten or something like that. If you can find that point where the silvers aren't going but the carp are, then that's happy place. That's where we're going to catch the most fish without any aggro. put that little pot in, so I'll swap straight over to my shallowest rig. And now hopefully this will massively change things, because now what I'm trying to get is what I didn't touch on before when I was going through plumbing up, is the reason you're after your shallowest rig, and say in this case, yeah, it's the perfect, they're pretty much what I'm after. It's what you need to always have when you fish with a carp down the edge, is to fish at what I like to call a curb. Yeah, where the bank goes down to the bottom, where the bottom starts. If you can get into that right angle, that is the optimum place to fish. Simply because carp, they don't like swimming about for bait. If you've got a pile of bait out from the bank, then they can come in at all sorts of angles from it. It gets disturbed, it messes all over the place. If I can get them in on that curve, that sort of right angle bit, then you'll find that all the carp swim in the same way. They often come from the far side of your peg and come in, but they're always facing into that point. So as long as you can get your rig in there as well, it puts it in the optimum position to get a bite. So I'm going to put my little pile in there. That releases lovely and quick. And once my pile's in, dodge the boss's camera. Right over the pile, so that's in a far better position now, hopefully, for me to get a bite compared to when it was out from the bank. I've got reduced depth, which is hopefully going to keep them on the bottom a little bit better. But also, hopefully, I'm as close as I can get, depending on the undercut, into that right angle, that sort of trough where the fish want to feed, or where they want to feed happiest. And you can see instantly I've got so many, or so much less indications. Yeah, my float is just sitting there. And I've got my nice pile, my rig set right over the top. Hopefully I'm achieving what I showed you on the mat. I've just got that little pile, my corn right over the top of it, very like method feedery sort of approach, my little trap set. And then all I've got to do is wait for a carp to come into that depth. Now it's just a case of whether they are happy to come into that shallow water. I mean, we're rushing things. Often you'll have to, your session's got to progress, you've got to catch a few deeper, and then slowly you've got to let them move up to the shallower water. I'm having to do this today through necessity because I'm getting too many liners, too many small fish, so I've had to move to the real shallow water just to get them in. So that finally went nice. I must admit that took a little bit longer than what I was expecting. We've had a couple come in the peg and I've not had a clean bite, but what it's completely alleviated is all the aggro. I mean, I'm getting pretty much no indications whatsoever off roach, and it just allows them to sit, wait nicely as close as I can get to that right angle as what I was on about. And then with a bit of luck, hook a prop one in the mouth. I'd say that's another thing worth just touching on, is that you find that the shallower you get, as a rule, pretty much, very rarely I've found it not to be the case, they get bigger. Those carp know, the biggest fish in your peg know that the shallower they feed, the safer they are. The more they can get into that little undercut, that little right angle, that's the most bait they can get, because they're nice and greedy and they want big mouthfuls. But say it's also, they feel a little bit safer there. So you may find that you get a few less indications in that, right into that tight water, but ultimately the bigger fish, meaning I put a little bit more weight in my net, and this one's proper pulling. He's a lovely one. Oh, I'll tell you another little tip that I want to just touch on as well after I've netted this, just before we finish on that. Just pop this hook out. Is that you'll find with this shallow rig, let me just get rid of him. This is something that Des or someone told me years ago, is that with your really, really shallow rig, and often the case with actual shallow fishing as well, is that when that fish is in your net, you notice that your float's always on the rim of your landing net. That always seems to be the best depth, coincidentally. But what I do, as well as I always have me a couple of little fine tuners underneath my float that mark my depth, but you find that even they get battered about quite a bit when doing this. So what I actually like to do is put a little turn in my main line and actually put a loop over the top of my bristle. Yeah, you need a good quality float to do that. You're not going to do that with a poor float, it's going to explode. Excuse me. But by putting that loop over the top of my bristle, it locks it. There's no chance in the world of that float moving. They're not going to explode in my rig, which means I'm not going to lose my depth, which can really happen a lot when you're fishing with these nice little shallow rigs. But hopefully, those few little things that we've touched upon will help you put a few more fish in the net, and not make those dodgy decisions. The biggest tip I can give for fishing down the edge is, if you can possibly leave that big pot alone. Yeah, all the big pot does in most occasions is create problems. I mean, I've got no problem with people using a big pot and feeding a small amount of bait, but those great big pots full of bait, all they're ever going to do is get too many fish into your bag on most occasions, spread your bait too much, make your bag look brilliant, but it's going to cost the amount of fish you put in your net at the end of the day, which for me, it's a no-brainer. Keep it small, catch more fish, I'm happy.